This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this community meeting regarding opportunity housing in San Jose. And I'll be providing an overview of the facts and context. My name is Juan Estrada, joined by Tamara Sanchez, and we both live, I think, in District 5.
Yes, we do.
And first of all, about this meeting, after the first meeting on Monday the 12th, there were questions posed, so wanted to make sure that everyone understood that this meeting is being hosted by Neighbors for Neighbors. It's not hosted by a for-profit, nonprofit, or any type of organization or association. For example, Tamara and I are not part of a group that is holding this meeting. It's being held by 7 neighbors from multiple city council districts who organize the meetings. The meetings are being held to provide neighbors with an opportunity to get information, ask questions, and provide feedback to city staff. There seemed to be a need for that type of opportunity by neighbors, and so we appreciate that everyone joining us tonight as a panelist is here to help us accomplish that. So 7 of the 8 neighbors are serving as Zoom co-hosts. I realize I have an error. There were 8 of us organizing the meetings. 7 of us are serving as Zoom co-hosts. So on the 12th, on Monday, Karen Lattin, Jackie Hefner, and Stephen Pinkston, and I believe they both live in District 2 in San Jose. You heard that I'm Juan Estrada and this is Tamara Sanchez. We both live in District 5. We may be members of certain groups or organizations, but that's not why we're here tonight. We're here simply as neighbors to help provide you with information. And on the 22nd, we will have a presentation or a meeting, and it will be hosted by Liz Galeos Glenn and Alex Dersh. Alex Dersh is from District 6, and I'm so sorry at this time I cannot recall Liz's council district, but she will let you know on in a week from the day when she helps co-host the next meeting. And then Tamara, take it away.
Okay. So the city council will be basically deciding whether to explore allowing opportunity housing citywide according to a 5-step process, which is recommended by the general plan reviewed task force. If it's approved, the planning division staff would begin the 5-step exploration process. And if rejected, then nothing would happen, no exploration would take place. In opportunity housing, depending on the lot size, it would allow up to 4 housing units on residential neighborhoods. General plan and designation. This could include single family units, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And it's designed to be compatible with existing neighborhoods and height limits, spacing restrictions, and architectural style. Oh, you're on mute, Juan.
Thank you. So what has already been decided? Details of the 5-step exploration recommended by the task force, cost-effective analysis of hypothetical opportunity housing types to be presented to City Council along with the proposed exploration. 2 environmental analysis would occur, and state law already allows ADUs depending on lot size. I was trying to recall what that acronym stands for. But ADUs are units that can be built by single family property owners at this time. So what about the task force recommendation? What would it include? It would include a citywide community engagement effort, explore creating an affordable housing incentive, a displacement risk analysis, determine if existing renters protections are sufficient. I'm not reading the entire information because a video of this meeting will be made available sometime after the 22nd, and so you'll have an opportunity to review all of these details if you'd like. and consider additional restrictions for use of opportunity housing units as short-term rentals. Tamara? Tamara, go ahead.
I was talking on mute.
All right.
Okay, so the task force would also provide recommendations regarding preserving historic areas and properties. They would consider to allow adaptive reuse of structures that are ineligible for inclusion on the City of San Jose Historic Resources Inventory. And they would also consider an age-based rule for older homes applying for opportunity housing if updates to the historic resources inventory are not completed by the time of implementation.
And for clarification, this is what the task force recommendation included. Okay, so next, update citywide design guidelines and standards, revise general plan and zoning code. And you could read the details there, but the point is to make sure that opportunity housing is compatible with existing neighborhoods. So what will not yet be decided? Details of a final proposal for opportunity housing would be determined during the 5-step exploration should the city council direct staff to do that. That's not something that's being decided at this time. And no implementation until after exploration is completed. And that is estimated to occur by end of 2022. And Tamara?
And this is, and it's being considered in, hang on a second, the screen's not letting me see. It's being considered now because the process is part of a broader 4-year general plan review. And some of the issues it seeks to address is the housing affordability, housing availability, homeownership, inequality, and displacement of individuals.
All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Sethiawan, and I'm a planner with the City of San Jose's Planning Division. And with me, we have Jared Hart, Division Manager of the Citywide Planning Team, and Michael Brio, who is our Deputy Director of City Planning. I think that's your title, right, Michael? And, you know, I'm going to give a short presentation, and then we will answer any of your questions at the end through the Q&A. So we'll try to keep our presentation short, and we're going to start with some background on zoning in San Jose and the housing crisis. Currently, of all the residential land in San Jose, 94%, so almost all of it, is designated for single family homes. And that's much higher than the national average of 75% of the residential land that is in big cities that are zoned for single family homes. And you can see the extent of the land with the light yellow on the map on the screen. And that shows all the land for single family neighborhoods. And the shortage of land to build homes is one of the contributors to the housing shortage and affordability crisis. And we see that all over the Bay and San Jose, especially now with median home sale prices reaching $1.225 million as of the fourth quarter of 2020. And I think it's continuing to rise. So with these issues, we ask ourselves, you know, where do workers, teachers, young families, and others go who can't afford a single family home in San Jose? Where do they go? A lot of families, they don't necessarily qualify for affordable housing, but also they can't quite afford a typical single family home in San Jose. And additionally, families may not want to live in the higher density developments and prefer single family neighborhoods. Next slide. Is that right? Okay. All right, so what is opportunity housing? You know, as Tamara mentioned earlier, opportunity housing is one way to deliver more housing choices by allowing additional housing types in existing single family neighborhoods, but at the same time, while keeping the general form and the scale of a typical residential neighborhood. We've had people ask if we're considering this to meet our housing production goals, and yes, it will help some, but this is just one strategy in our toolbox to help with these goals. And so what this will do is to provide the additional housing choice rather than just single family or just multifamily homes. We would allow, multi-unit housing such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on properties with a residential neighborhood land use designation, which is typically used for single family neighborhoods. So they are affordable by design. They are not deed restricted, for a certain affordability level, but they are affordable by design because they're smaller in size. And it can also be referred to as missing middle housing, which refers to the scale of buildings, but it's also occasionally used to reference a missing housing type for the middle or working class. So between 1990 and 2013, less than 10% of housing was built in that missing middle scale, the duplex, fourplex. And that's why many refer to it as missing. So post-World War II, the city built primarily single-family housing, and it's only been since 2013 that those 4 to 6 story residential developments that we see a lot in San Jose recently, when that was built. So some cities have already allowed opportunity housing type development. So in cities like Minneapolis, Seattle, and Portland, they approved it maybe a year or two ago. So those, that's already been implemented, is kind of starting. So, and in fact, the state of Oregon actually passed legislation to allow more housing types in their exclusively single family housing zones. And then in the past couple months, if you've read the news, you see a lot of Northern California cities that are also following suit to allow additional housing choices in these exclusively single family neighborhoods. So Sacramento is going to do it as part of their general plan update, and so is South San Francisco. And the city of Berkeley City Council also joined them in citing their racist ties of zoning for exclusively single family neighborhoods. So it's a movement that's gaining steam across the nation and the state. And so why are we talking about opportunity housing? As Juan and Tamara mentioned earlier, it was explored as part of the general plan 4-year review, which is a periodic check-in, so to speak, of our general plan document and its policies. And City Council directed staff to explore opportunity housing as part of the scope of work. And staff was to explore allowing single family parcels that are currently designated with a residential neighborhood land use designation to allow 2 to 4 units with some guidelines. So limiting it to parcels near transit-oriented urban villages or adjacent to residential parcels with existing medium density building types, developing a set of design guidelines, allowing flexibility on the number of units depending on the location and size and other factors, clarifying that any redevelopment remains within the discretion of the property owner, and specifying that this would be sensitive to historic neighborhoods, and also validating that opportunity housing projects are cost effective. So in response to that direction, staff and the General Plan Task Force, we discussed the topic of opportunity housing at 4 different meetings, and staff and task force looked at allowing up to 4 units per parcel and analyzed where it would make the most sense. So we also looked at allowing a mix of single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, noting that there's existing state legislation that allows ADUs. Per state law, opportunity housing developments would be allowed to build ADUs if they comply to the city's zoning code. So as part of this process, we also looked at considerations and next steps that would be needed to further explore opportunity housing. So what was recommended? So there's actually 2 different recommendations on opportunity housing. The staff recommended to allow opportunity housing generally within a half-mile walk shed around transit-oriented urban villages and or on parcels that share a property line with properties that allow multifamily residential. And this is consistent with the direction from City Council. The task force recommended something different. They recommended that the City Council should explore opportunity housing for properties citywide that have a residential neighborhood land use designation. And with the addition that staff should proceed with the opportunity housing work while also prioritizing urban village planning. So both of these recommendations will be presented to City Council to decide how to move forward. We received a lot of questions about protections for historic resources. So under our recommendations, staff would explore strategies to preserve historic areas and properties while still allowing opportunity housing. Staff would consider the adaptive reuse of the structures of historic properties, but would also consider an age-based rules for older homes if the historic resources inventory update is not yet complete by the time of implementation. So for example, we'd consider requiring any homes that are built before, say, the 1950s or something. We haven't determined the year yet, but that's something we would figure out in the next phase. But we're thinking of setting a year and those homes that are older than a certain year, that they would have to go through a similar permitting process to the single family house permit for redevelopment to ensure that the historic characteristics are maintained. So they're not, it's not as easy to develop opportunity housing on those properties. All single family home projects at this time, if it's not on a property that's on the historic resources inventory, it would be by right. But if it's on the historic resource inventory, it would not be by right. So staff would require a single family house permit, which requires approval from the planning director, and it may require public notification depending on the size of the project. And we're thinking of a similar process for opportunity housing to make sure that these historic resources are adaptively reused and preserved. And we may require the same for properties that meet the H-based rule, but that's still to be determined. We also received a lot of questions on the design standards and what they would be and whether we would be changing setbacks or heights, parking floor area, ratio, et cetera. But we don't know the answer to that yet. It's a little too early in our process to make those exact determinations of what they are. And we wanted to engage the community when we draft those and revise those standards. So these changes would only be explored should council provide direction to staff to explore the opportunity housing policy, later this year. But as you heard earlier from the scope of work that was directed by council, the intent is to stay to the form and scale of a typical single family neighborhoods while also allowing additional units. So we don't anticipate it to change drastically. We've also received a lot of questions in terms of who would be responsible for public utility and infrastructure needs, and the developer would be. We charge the developer fees like parkland impact fees, school fees, and others to ensure that they pay into and support the added demand on services. We also received some questions about potential displacement and what protections there would be for long-term renters in existing homes. So as part of our recommendation, staff would conduct a displacement risk analysis to identify the communities that are at risk, and if the existing city policies and protections, such as the Alice Act ordinance, the apartment rent ordinance, and others, if they're sufficient, or if we need to introduce new ones. So here's a map of the staff recommendation. The blue areas are where opportunity housing would be allowed, and then the dark gray symbolizes the transit urban villages. So those are urban villages near existing or planned transit stations like BART, light rail, or bus rapid transit. And note that under the staff recommendation, we would also allow properties that share a property line with, properties that allow multifamily housing to have opportunity housing, but that's a pretty small number and it's sprinkled throughout the city, so it's not shown on the map. And since we're focusing on District 5, 7, and 8 tonight, we wanted to include some slides that show the areas where opportunity housing would be allowed in each district. And so here on the map, we have on the screen, the District 5 map is shown, and there's quite a few transit urban villages in this area. We have the Alum Rock Avenue urban villages along Alum Rock Avenue, and then we have the North Capitol Avenue / McKee Road urban village on North Capitol Avenue. And here we have District 7, which only has 2 transit urban villages on the district boundary. And that's the Kirtner Light Rail / Caltrain urban village to the west. And then the East Capitol Expressway / Silver Creek Road urban village to the east. And last but not least, we have District 8, the District 8 map, which includes the Arcadia East Ridge urban village and the East Capitol Expressway / Silver Creek Road urban village that we mentioned earlier because it shares a boundary with District 7. And so here are some examples of opportunity housing types. The top left and bottom 2 are Bay Area examples. In fact, the one on the bottom right is actually a San Jose example. And then the top 2 on the right is a rendering of a duplex, one entrance to the front and one entrance to the side. So at this time, staff is working to complete the cost effectiveness study that was requested in the City Council's scope of work. We're studying the cost effectiveness for both the staff and the task force recommendation by looking at different parts of the city and where it may or may not be cost effective, and whether distance to an urban village or transit would make an impact, or different factors that would, change the feasibility of it. So this effort's underway, but it's still in the pretty early stages of the study, and it would be included in the opportunity housing staff report to City Council to help them make the decision. So in our next steps for opportunity housing, staff will take the package of task force recommendations to City Council later this year. And at that time, City Council will decide whether staff should pursue developing opportunity housing. So if council directs staff to pursue it, staff would begin a series of action items, including conducting extensive community engagement, conducting a displacement risk analysis, preparing design standards and reviewing them for feedback through the community engagement process, preparing an environmental analysis to identify potential impacts of opportunity housing, and more. And with that concludes my presentation. So if you're interested in learning more about opportunity housing, please visit the website on the screen, or you can email us at generalplanstaff@sanjoseca.gov for any additional questions if they don't get answered tonight. And I'll leave that up for a couple more seconds before I stop sharing.
Juan, actually, I have a brief video that was put on YouTube, and it has to do with Ballard, which is a neighborhood in Seattle. And in 1990, Seattle switched to multi-family infill, which is the other form of opportunity housing. And so I wanted to show that, and then I'll just continue after that. Juan, are you ready with that showing?
I am. And so attendees, so that you'll know, David asked me to share the video. So I'm about to share it. Let me go there, click share, and I'll hit play.
Contest of livable ballot. And I'm Bill, a community advocate. And
I'm just pausing for a second. Are you able to hear the audio?
I am. I've heard it several times. It's not very clear, but
Oh,
perhaps,
that's okay. I just wanted to make sure everyone could hear it. I'll go ahead and hit play again.
yes, thank you.
Contest of livable ballot. And I'm Bill, a community advocate and a former city council candidate. And behind us is what's left of the Up House. The Up House in Ballard became a story across the world of one person's principled stand against development. It's also a metaphor for upzoning in Ballard and its negative effects: more and bigger construction, increasing housing prices, gentrification, homelessness, and a lower quality of life.
What's happened to Ballard is instructive, because Newton is facing now the kind of powerful upzoning and overdevelopment pressures Ballard confronted a decade ago. Will Newton be transformed as Ballard has been? There's more population and regulatory pressure on Ballard to force more intense housing land use than there is on Newton, but it's political and speculative pressures that really drive growth in both.
In 1990, the state of Washington enacted the Growth Management Act. It required local municipalities to incorporate growth targets as part of regional growth planning. 38 neighborhoods in Seattle, including Ballard, were designated as urban villages, appropriate for much more intense development. During this period, the official neighborhood planning process engaged thousands of citizens to participate in deciding how to meet the growth targets they had been assigned. At first, infill housing units, while crowded, at least matched the scale of existing neighborhoods. In 2010, at the insistence of developers, the zoning codes were changed to allow far more intense development, and buildings no longer match what are in neighborhoods.
As the millennium came to a close, the tech boom in Seattle led to enormous pressure for real estate redevelopment. Elected officials and the developers and tech giants who fund their campaigns pushed for, quote, higher value, unquote, uses of land, or property speculation. Within the past decade, nearly 20 major condo retail projects were underway or had just been completed within a 5-block radius of downtown Ballard, adding some 2,500 new households to the neighborhood. In 2010, Seattle did a virtual upzone by allowing significantly more density in low-rise zones, ostensibly to provide greater affordability. Allowed building heights were raised, lot coverages increased, limits on the number of units on a parcel were removed, and requirements for providing parking on site were removed from many areas. As highly paid millennial tech workers, willing to pay higher rents for smaller units, poured into the area, families and less affluent renters were displaced. Single-family homeowners were and are besieged with offers and threats from developers seeking to buy and demolish their houses to build towers of high-priced studios and micro-units. Despite the non-stop construction of rental units, between 2010 and 2015, Seattle saw the fastest rise in rents of any place in the U.S. So much for added supply, lowering prices. With so many added units, Ballard has reached 427% of the 20-year growth target was set in 1994. In fact, Ballard has already exceeded its updated growth target through 2024.
Seattle no longer has a legitimate community engagement process. What they have now, I call engagement theater. It's where residents are invited to participate in superficial exercises, often involving Legos or Post-it notes. And this creates the appearance of community engagement and buy-in without really inviting substantial residential input on important issues.
The change has been dramatic. 50% of Seattle was zoned single-family, and 62% of Seattle's tree canopy was located in single-family zones. From 2001 to 2007, single-family lots undergoing redevelopment lost 41% of their tree canopy, while multi-unit lots lost 69%. Along with trees and green space, naturally affordable homes have been lost to higher use redevelopment in the name of affordable housing. Rents on newer units are more than 50% higher than comparable older units. Many renters and small businesses have been displaced, and Seattle's homelessness problem has increased dramatically as housing prices have soared. The added housing has come with an insufficient increase in infrastructure. Politicians, tech leaders, and developers value the exchange value of land, its speculative value, not the value of the use to which it is currently put. Community coherence, security, historic preservation, green space, none of these matter.
As early as the 1970s, economists began documenting the process and effects of urban redevelopment and densification. Sociologist Harvey Molotch coined the term urban growth machine to describe the collective actions of the various parties that benefit from intense urban infill. The bankers, investors, developers, construction trades, and even city government looking to grow its tax base. Collectively, the growth machine has an insatiable appetite for growth at any cost, but this growth is unsustainable and benefits few while hurting many.
There's really no relief in sight for Ballard, where pro-growth media and city leadership are doing everything that they can to demonize single-family neighborhoods.
One even proposed a highest use tax that would charge residents not on the home they actually have, but on the highest possible use of their property. For those who continue to live in single-family houses in areas rezoned multifamily, to encourage turnover. Between lax zoning enforcement, inexpensive demolition permits, and special permits given out like nothing special, Newton's zoning ordinance is under siege, and so is our community. Tear downs are rampant, and so are replacement builds. Mansions, townhouses, multi-units, and apartment and condo complexes. All of them mean tremendous tree loss and displacement of people who cannot keep up with the higher housing prices brought by higher use redevelopment. Can we save Newton from Ballard's fate? What can we learn about the dangers of upzoning from a Seattle neighborhood that's home to the real life of house?
Okay, David.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I apologize for of course, it wasn't my film, but the sound on it was rather bad at any rate. But just to recap, what happened is that they went to Opportunity Housing, and at first they tried to match the housing with the neighborhood. In other words, kind of keep the architecture and a kind of a cohesive span in that in Ballard where they were working. And it wasn't too long after that, actually over several years, the developers and lobbyists began to ask for higher density, which meant higher going up, that is height requirement and everything else, and so that they could include more. So the owners of those communities, being, as you saw there in several of the pictures, you have a single family home sitting next to, in this case, 2 and 3 and maybe not 4 stories, at least right in that particular area. But you have something that has just gotten away. You have a pressure from City Hall, where one recommendation was made that taxes be based on the highest and best use. And for Ballard at that time, the highest and best use was multiple units, not single family homes. Thank goodness that did not pass, but it gives you an idea as to how out of touch that particular thing and the constant din of construction that's going on in that particular area. Well, I kind of like, you know, last Monday when I talked about the developer and about the profit motive for any private concern. And part of the profit motive was the cost of land, or simply the cost. And so looking at our present situation, I was reading in a report here just today that March, the median price for a single family home in Santa Clara County was $1,600,000. Now that means that half were above 1,600,000 and half were below. If you talk about land cost, if you're intending to do anything with, say, a $1,600,000 home, which is probably 2,000 square feet, and on a lot of 60 by 100, 6,000 square feet, you might have enough in that house to partition it, maybe make comfortable a 3-bedroom. A 3-unit. Possibly you could make an addition, maybe build something over the garage if it's not, or off to the back side connected to make your 4-plex and maintain the situation with your developing and in your neighborhood, because it kind of blends in. With the other one, however, let's say that you find a home selling for $800,000. And it's 800,000 because it's small. It might be 11, 12, 1,300 square feet. It is in an older part of the city. It needs upcare and so on. More or less what a definition of what gentrification would be going for. However, in this case, when a developer looks at this and sees 800,000 for one and $1,600,000 for another, and the difference being 800,000, he might be tempted really to go to that smaller home and then just demolish the home and build a 4-plex from scratch. And so that is, it just seems to me that this is something that could backfire on the very people who are looking to go into other parts of the city. One of the problems that I see with the task force recommendation that the R1 be changed to multiple usage is the two words by right, B-Y-R-I-G-H-T. By right has the legal definition or idea that it is that person's right to do that. And you, as a community, have very little say to do. You have very little, you have no appeal and no real say in how that's put together. Now, the one main thing that must be followed is code enforcement. So if the toilets work and nothing, and they're not going to burn down with electricity and so on, that could be it. Now, we've shown some very fine pictures of homes that have been altered, that have been divided, and we've got a history of that that is clear. Certainly before the war, when we had so many people coming in and they were looking for housing, then it is very, obviously we've seen that. I myself have lived in an old Victorian when I went to San Jose State, and it was a 4-unit. And it worked very well, but it looked like everything in the neighborhood. Now, however, the idea of by right is that we've seen these beautiful structures, we've seen how they've done, but what about the guy who does it almost the cheapest way he can? You've got a nice house, and above your garage, you put an extension up, and it's simply a box up there with small windows and so on. And but it has all of the accoutrements. So it's very important, it seems to me, and it was mentioned, that you have some kind of an idea of architectural and some kind of control. But I have a feeling that this what are you going to say to someone who has something like that already made? Maybe it was just an extension for someone in his family. You'll let me know, Juan, when I'm out of time?
Yes, that was perfect timing, actually. It's been 15 minutes.
Okay, so next, San Jose neighborhoods in a San Jose Neighborhoods for All, and coalition member Aaron Eckhouse will be speaking.
So my name is Aaron Eckhouse. I'm the regional policy manager with California YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard. And I'm here representing the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition. We're a group of a number of organizations representing a lot of different interests in the housing space, who are all united in supporting the city moving forward with this study of opportunity housing. This is some of the groups in our coalition. You'll see my organization, California YIMBY, to the right, and South Bay YIMBY, which is our local YIMBY team. You'll see we have groups here that are focused specifically on affordable housing and services for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. You'll see groups dedicated to fair housing, groups who are dedicated to sustainable land use and protecting our environment, as well as groups focused on sustainable transportation. We have a lot of different groups that are focused on a lot of different things, but we're all united with this idea that we think opportunity housing is a promising idea for the city of San Jose to pursue and can help make San Jose a better place for current and future residents. So there's going to be some information in my presentation that is going to be similar to what Jessica presented, and I'll ask your indulgence for that, and hopefully I can present some new context and sort of interpretation of it. But I'm going to start with reviewing what the General Plan Task Force recommended. This was an idea that City Council asked them to look into. And as they examined it, they made a couple of important determinations. One is that they thought it would make most sense to explore this idea citywide. I'll go into more about why that is later in the presentation. They thought ongoing community engagement would be an important part of that process. We're not just gonna, drop a fully formed policy in front of the people of San Jose, but there's gonna be work ongoing to seek their feedback on important priorities. Minimizing displacement risk, we want this to be something that is additive for housing and not pushing people out, as well as strategies to preserve historic areas and look at ways that we can create housing that is affordable or moderately priced through this process. We think that we, our coalition, are supporting this study. Again, we want to emphasize there's not a policy in front of the City Council right now. There is the concept of moving forward. We think that this is a really promising idea, and we want to see the work that staff does to investigate what potential opportunity housing has to advance sustainable growth in San Jose, to create more housing opportunities, including, in particular, housing opportunities that are affordable to middle-income residents, which is something we know is a huge challenge, that we're not producing right now enough homes in San Jose that are affordable for middle-class people, teachers, nurses, firefighters, so many of the essential workers who we've depended on through this pandemic, and something that can reverse historic patterns of segregation. We know that land use is something, land use history, there's an unfortunate history of these policies being used to exclude and to confine certain groups of people to certain neighborhoods where they had less access to opportunity. We think opportunity housing can help us reverse that. And we have a legal and moral duty to affirmatively further fair housing that we think that this could advance. I'll start with just a quick review of San Jose history and how we got to our current point in time, starting with the fact that before, there was San Jose. This area was the home to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. They're still present in this area. They're still active in San Jose politics and Santa Clara County politics, but obviously they have been greatly reduced in number and in political power by the arrival of European colonists and the growth of the United States in this area. San Jose as a city was in 1850, the first capital of the state of California. It had at the time a population of around 1,000 people. A century later, that population had grown to 95,000, and Santa Clara County was the Valley of Heart's Delight. It was an area of many fruit orchards and the associated processing. This is a place where you are already beginning to see the history of segregation and exclusion. In San Jose, agricultural workers, including Japanese Americans and Mexican Americans, were confined to certain neighborhoods. They often were forced to live in overcrowded housing, which is something that continues to this day in San Jose. And other neighborhoods were exclusively reserved for white residents and higher income residents. Those neighborhoods to this day, you will see disparities in both the racial demographics, the socioeconomic demographics, and also the resources available in those neighborhoods. If you go to today, we have a population of over 1 million. San Jose has grown substantially. Those orchards have largely been paved over for subdivisions. And we've gone from the Valley of Heart's Delight to Silicon Valley, and the hub of the US technology industry, and one of the most economically dynamic places in the United States. San Jose for generations was a place where low-income residents had the best opportunity of anywhere in the country of having their children grow up to become better off than they were. But our high housing costs are jeopardizing that and making it harder for us to continue that promise. One major driver of those high housing costs is the fact that the vast majority of land in San Jose is off limits for new housing. This is similar to the map that Jessica presented. You'll see everything in pink is exclusively for single family homes. Everything in blue that's the area where we're allowed to build new housing in San Jose. You can see it's these tiny little islands in a sea of exclusionary zoning. Only 50% of San Jose residents live in single family homes, but 90% of the land is set aside for those residents. That's a deep inequity that restricts the areas of the city that are available to a majority of residents. And we know, again, that this is something that is linked to a history of deliberately exclusionary policy. That 90% is higher than the average in the Bay Area, and is significantly higher than some of our neighborhoods. Mountain View, only half of the land area, of the residential land area, is zoned exclusively for single family homes. It obviously is not the Mountain View is, a paradise of affordability, but it does create more opportunities for them to add housing. San Jose, obviously, like the rest of the region and the rest of the state, needs a lot more homes to accommodate our growing economy and growing population, both from people seeking to move here and also from young people who are born and grow up here and seek homes of their own. San Jose has a mandate from the state to build 63,000 new homes over the next 8-year planning period. It's going to be really hard for us to do that if we persist in a land use pattern where over 90% of the city is off limits for new homes. It's part of the context in which San Jose is exploring opportunity housing, is recognizing that we need to change our approach in order to meet these housing goals and produce housing that we need to accommodate the next generation of San Jose residents. We'll see here, we talked about the really high costs here. Those costs are high and rising. They continue to increase over the past year. That extends to rents as well. They have gone up substantially in the past decade and are getting farther and farther out of reach for the majority of San Jose residents. You'll see here, this is a comparison of, certain jobs in San Jose. You'll see a lot of essential workers like janitors and retail workers are far from being able to afford the rent on even a 1-bedroom apartment in San Jose. And middle-class workers like teachers and firefighters are equally far from being able to afford to buy a home of their own. You will see, however, that townhomes and condos are much more accessible and much more affordable at something closer to the average San Jose income, which is, I believe, around $125,000, the median household income in the city. So the idea of opportunity housing is we create more opportunities for middle income, particularly for middle income residents, to buy a home and create more affordable rental opportunities for middle income workers as well. This is related to an idea called the missing middle. It's used in a couple of different ways in housing. One is to refer to this middle class that makes too much money to afford housing subsidies, but not enough money to afford housing on the current housing market. But it also applies to a scale of housing that ranges from duplexes to actually stuff that's larger than opportunity housing and what we're currently talking about. But this is within the opportunity housing context. Opportunity housing is something that already exists in San Jose. You'll see that there's quite a lot of it in some of the districts that we're talking about today, particularly District 5. But it's found in every district in the city. It's very widespread. And it goes back to the fact that in the past, we didn't have this pattern of exclusively single-family zoning in as many areas, and we allowed a greater mix of housing types in more neighborhoods. Many of our most beloved neighborhoods in San Jose and other parts of the state include this mix of housing types. I myself, I live in a single-family home with an ADU below and next door to a fourplex. I haven't had any problems with that mixing of housing types, and I think it makes my neighborhood really nice. These are examples of opportunity housing that you'll see throughout the city. And just, again, this is to emphasize, this is something that already exists, and it's found everywhere in all parts of San Jose. It's more widespread in some neighborhoods than others, but almost every neighborhood in San Jose, you can find examples of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And I think, you might have them in your neighborhood and not even recognize, like, if you were to walk by this house on the street, would you know that it was a duplex and not a single family home? I don't know that I would. And I look for these things pretty closely, actually. So again, this is something that's already part of our neighborhood character. And we think allowing it again could have benefits for a great many San Jose residents. I'm going to talk about some of the different contexts in which opportunity housing, oh God, I don't have a minute left, can be beneficial. So it creates new home ownership opportunities, in particular opportunities for middle income residents. This is an example of a sort of similar scale building in Portland. It's a sixplex, so it's actually a little larger than what we're talking about. It's part of a vernacular style housing advocates there called the Portland Tall Boys. I choose it as an example not only because I think it's a pretty attractive building, but because the homes in it are priced at a rate that is affordable to a middle income household in Portland, to somebody earning the median income in Portland. This is something that we have a huge lack of in San Jose, and we think opportunity housing could help provide. We also think it can help reverse historic patterns of segregation and advance fair housing. California has a law that requires cities to affirmatively further fair housing to reduce disparities and allow people more access to high opportunity neighborhoods. One thing we're concerned about is that if we limit opportunity housing only to transit-rich areas, we will be once again continuing to exclude people from many of the highest resource, most amenity-rich neighborhoods in San Jose. Places that are great places to live, where people will be near job centers, where people will be near neighborhood retail, where people will be able to send their kids to great schools. But if we limit ourselves only to the urban villages, we'll be continuing to exclude people from those neighborhoods. And we'll be continuing to force people out of San Jose into the San Joaquin Valley, where they have to commute 120 miles round trip each day. So we think this is a policy that has a lot of promise, that can create more housing opportunities for middle income residents, that can advance fair housing, and that can create more sustainable land use patterns. We're really excited that the city is exploring it, and I think there's a lot of potential for this to benefit everyone in San Jose.
All right, so the first question would be Doris Livesley. And would you like to ask your question? Doris?
You could read her question if she does not speak.
Okay, so Doris is asking, since I don't understand the chart, what percentage of residents live in single family homes versus the exempt plan developments?
I don't think we have that calculation yet. That's a question that's been asked a few times, recently, and we're gonna look into it and get back to you. But we haven't estimated, the population itself that are within single family versus the planned development zonings. So I'll have to get back to you on that. And Jared, do you want to add anything?
Sure, I'll just add that planned development zonings include single family homes as well. It can vary. It could be multifamily, or it could be single family, or somewhere in between, such as townhomes.
All right. So I think we can proceed to the next question, which is Kimberly Irwin. And would you like to ask your question?
Let's go ahead and ask the question. It looks like she's not available.
Okay, what sizes of properties are required for a duplex, triplex, or fourplex? What would be the plan to mitigate parking and traffic issues?
In terms of the size, so right now, what is being proposed is up to a fourplex, and that would be on a, you know, existing single family lots. So in terms of the you know, the requirements currently in the zoning code for the minimum lot size for a single family property, single family home or zoned property would not change. So we're not looking at making changes to those minimum lot sizes for duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes under the proposal. In terms of parking, and that's something, yeah, there's definitely, we've heard a lot of concern about parking with the proposed opportunity housing concept. And it's definitely something that would be looked at in the next phase of work. If, you know, the council directs staff to continue working on this concept, that's something we would be looking at in terms of the potential requirements for parking.
All right. The next person is Hugo Mesa. And the question is, what specific measures can be taken to ensure that opportunity housing is implemented equitably citywide? It would be a shame if OH was an opportunity housing was unfairly used mostly in generally marginalized and red line communities like East San Jose. How can the city ensure opportunity housing redevelopment is equally used in traditionally affluent neighborhoods like Willow Glen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for the question. So I would say that, you know, as in terms of Jessica presented the two recommendations on where opportunity housing could, you know, potentially be allowed. With staff's recommendation, of course, it was within a half mile of the transit-oriented urban villages, which do cover a good portion of the city. And then, of course, the general plan task force is recommending a citywide approach. And so this will be something that the city council will need to consider when, you know, the recommendations are brought forward to city council. They'll have to, that will be a question that that will need to be considered in terms of, you know, future direction on where opportunity housing could be allowed if, you know, if the council directs us to continue working on this.
Juan, tomorrow, is it okay if I comment on this as well?
Sure.
So I'll say this is one of the reasons that San Jose Neighborhoods for All is really strongly pushing for this to be implemented citywide. We think that will help ensure that these housing opportunities are available in all neighborhoods, including neighborhoods with a history of exclusion like Willow Glen, and including some of the most amenity and resource-rich neighborhoods of the city. And I think it's also sort of important to understand this is a major distinction between the approach that San Jose is considering and the approach that Portland and Minneapolis took versus the approach that Seattle took. Seattle rezoned only 6% of the single family zoned areas within the city, which meant that the change in any rezoned area was very intense because there were only there was a very high demand for new housing in Seattle, and there were only a few small areas where that demand could be accommodated. Whereas if we rezone more of the city, we expect that the change will be more distributed across the city, and you'll see more modest changes in many neighborhoods rather than intense change in a few neighborhoods.
The next question is it's from Ryan Globus, and he's asking in California.
Well, Ryan can, Ryan can share his audio and video if he'd like.
Okay.
He didn't say he didn't want to.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. Yeah, I guess when I hear about duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes, I often hear about one person buying the whole building and then renting out the other units. And I was wondering if in California, it's also possible for, like, say someone builds a duplex and then they sell each unit independently, because if so, then that would make housing much more, or home ownership, more affordable and accessible to folks.
Yeah, opportunity housing, at least in San Jose, we would allow for rental or for purchase. So yes, you could technically buy, one part of a duplex or a fourplex. And so, yeah, we're not going to restrict it to just rental or home ownership. So home ownership is an option for opportunity housing.
Yeah, this is Michael with planning. So our hope is that, I think a lot of people are focusing this as rental housing, but our hope is that people would also develop for sale housing, because in San Jose, we really don't have many condos and we don't really build townhomes anymore, and we don't have many of them. So your choice in San Jose is to buy that $1.2 million median home or something like that, or that's your choice, about it. So we really hope it will provide those opportunities for people that could buy something that's more affordable than $1.2 million at the median level. I think we don't know. So one of the things I think Jessica, she mentioned, is we're going to do a cost and feasibility analysis to understand, from at least in current and near-term market projections and costs, to understand what might people build and where, right? So would they build rental? Will they build for sale? Are there certain areas of the city they might do it or they might not do it? So you just need to kind of understand that, so the council has a full awareness of what we're likely to get and where we're likely to get it when they make the decision. At least in the next 5 years or so. Things can change, but it would give at least an understanding what would likely result. But our hope is that it'd be for sale as well.
All right, the next question would be from Trudy Ellerbeck.
And she asked to have her question read.
Okay. She said, I believe that everyone who wishes to have a roof over their head have one that is affordable. Kindly address the existing neighborhoods that are already densely populated. I can eyeball 25% of my 2-block radius that has already converted garages, ADUs, additions, or combinations. My neighborhood has an abundance of paved front yards, tree removal, cars blocking sidewalks. Neither code enforcement or Department of Transportation has had the needed resources to mitigate this kind of blight. Convince me that opportunity housing is a solution that will place further pressures on already densely populated neighborhoods. Convince me that opportunity housing is a solution that will not place further pressures on already densely populated neighborhoods.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Trudy. And I think tonight we're here to really present the information in terms of what the proposal is moving forward to council, what they'll be considering in terms of this potential policy change. I mean, I would say that there currently are areas in the city now that I think Aaron provided some good pictures of those in his presentation, that where we already have opportunity housing. So you can, there are examples out there. I think also the cost feasibility analysis will, hopefully help inform, as Michael was saying, at least in the short term, how much development would come from opportunity housing. I mean, I think it's not something where it would be unlikely to be a case where if a policy such as this were to move forward, where you would see immediate change and big changes, in neighborhoods, it would be likely to be incremental.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the design standards, if council moves forward with establishing design standards that make sense and work, it set parameters of what setbacks and heights, parking perhaps too, just what the development would actually look like is going to be really important. I know that there are bad examples of apartments, they call them dingbats, built in the 50s and 60s. And so we would want to ensure that we don't replicate those type of developments. I mean, they're not entirely bad because they're affordable, but it's really going to be important to sort of set those design standards, which are essentially regulatory, and they have to meet that things fit within the neighborhood. Yes.
The next question is from Jeffrey Fairfield. Would he like me to read this question?
We could give him a few seconds, Jeffrey.
Hello guys, thank you for being here and answering questions for us. My question, let me pop it up. Sorry, you guys kind of threw me into a weird thing. Let me see where it is. I can't actually see my question anymore, but what I had a question on was how will these new opportunity housing, how will it affect traffic? Like you guys were saying that you would look to put in areas that already had transit available, but how likely are they to use that transit rather than adding to our already impacted roads?
I can answer that question. Jared and Michael can chime in, but our transit, well, all our urban villages, but also our transit urban villages, they're meant to be sort of these small like neighborhood hubs where you can, it's a higher intensity of development, there's retail and commercial, your coffee shop, your salon, or, a small grocery store. So when allocating opportunity housing nearby, people can reduce their longer trips. They can walk to their coffee shop instead of jumping into the car and driving, a few miles away. So, locating them near these urban villages, there's definitely, a reasoning for that. And so people have easier access and walkable access to these services. And, anecdotally for me, if I lived near a transit urban village and had the option, Bay Area traffic is so bad, I would opt for light rail or the bus. And so, but that's anecdotal, and Jared and Michael can chime in if you'd like to.
I'll note here as well, the VTA rep on the general plan task force supported opportunity housing and supported having it be citywide. And their reasoning was that this will create more transit supportive land use patterns that will allow VTA, they'll help support VTA running better service. And so they think this is something that is complementary to their efforts to provide transit, is to allow more people to live in existing San Jose neighborhoods. And this is also why Greenbelt Alliance is part of our coalition. Because also, like, people don't have to live in San Jose to be on our roads. We have people currently who are driving from 100 miles away to come work here because they don't have a housing opportunity that's nearby. If they were able to live nearby, as Jessica said, maybe they walk, maybe they bike, maybe they just have a shorter drive, and that's better for our climate goals.
Yeah, I would also add that something that Aaron already touched upon in that, and Jared too, and that is, this is often referred to gentle density. So what we're talking about is duplexes, triplexes, maybe a fourplex. And we don't expect, this is going to be a neighborhood is going to be bulldozed and all big fourplexes are going to come in. There's likely to be just very slight incremental change that spread in many places in the city, so that the impacts on any given street would probably be minimal, because we're not anticipating a massive amount of these developments. We will do an environmental analysis. We anticipate it could be an EIR. We don't know right now to analyze what the environmental impacts of this would be. But full disclosure, it'll be looking at VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, to understand if we were to move forward with opportunity housing. It could be citywide, it could be more limited, whatever the council decides to what degree would that reduce people driving or increase driving, AKA vehicle miles traveled. So that would be part of the environmental analysis that would be done.
All right, the next question is by Hugo Mesa.
And he wanted us to read it earlier, so I'm assuming he does again.
Okay, what policies or rules can the city implement to prevent developers from buying property solely for the purpose of flipping a single family home into a quadplex using opportunity housing? That doesn't seem to further the spirit of opportunity housing, or does it?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Hugo. Yeah, so the city wouldn't be able to regulate who purchases single family homes, just like we can't now, in terms of who, whether a developer wants to buy a single family home today or either under the opportunity housing concept. I would say that the types of developers that most people you would think of, most people think of kind of your developers who are developing larger projects, kind of more the multifamily projects that we see today are not going to be the same developers who would be interested in developing something like a fourplex or a triplex. It would be a different type of developer that we don't necessarily have a lot of today in San Jose, because we're not seeing a lot of new kind of triplexes, fourplexes. We see some, but not as many. Most of the new residential development is of a bigger scale. And in terms of I think whether that's a positive or negative, I think just the idea in general, this kind of goes back to the rental versus ownership. As Michael had mentioned, it's our hope that that this would result in some units that would also be for sale, or rental as well, but that hopefully it would result in some units that are for sale that that would be more affordable than what we typically see today.
The next question is by Brian Prescott.
So Brian just messaged me that he got bumped from the Zoom. I don't know if he's trying to rejoin or not, but.
Okay, we can come back to it. Hugo Mesa then is next tomorrow, and he wanted his questions read.
Okay. Should opportunity housing be used to turn a single family home into 4 units? Could each unit then be sold separately like a condo, or would the property need to sell together like a duplex or apartment complex?
We answered that question earlier. It could be sold separately, or it could be sold together. It's not, we're not limiting it, so both could be an option.
And then if there are additional questions that have already been answered, please feel free to just note it. We want everyone to know that their question was posed, so we could just say already answered if that's the case.
All right. And is Brian back yet or not yet?
He's not. I don't know if he's going to be able to rejoin, but I'm sure he'd like to have the questions.
Okay. So he said, David, you mentioned that many of San Jose's existing multifamily homes were built after the war. As many people were moving to this area, this is how you found housing in college, in the Victorian next to San Jose State University. As you may know, many people are moving here now, myself among them. Why should my generation not have the right to build homes for ourselves and our families the way your generation did?
Yeah, that was more of a comment, but let me just add, I think that's one of the things we're really feeling as we do this work is that there's a generation, often baby boomers, not just baby boomers, that own homes, and they grew up in an era of when we mass-produced houses, and they were relatively affordable, not by design. And the next generations are having a really hard time moving into, buying a home or even living in the neighborhoods that they grew up in, unless, of course, they live with their parents, and maybe you perhaps. So I think this is this is an approach or a strategy that would allow people to live in either the neighborhood or the types of neighborhood they grew up in, where otherwise they may be excluded because of the high cost of single family housing.
And then David, I think the question was posed to you. Did you want to respond to that? And if you did, you're on mute.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, the question being, do you have a right to build where you want? What can I say? Where do you want to build? That's what this program is about. It's saying that you can build, you can buy into a property, into an area that you like when it goes up for sale, or you can join with other people and buy it together and divide it however you want. It isn't a question of you're being able to build. What they're saying is that 94% of properties are single family dwellings. And they want to break that up and put anything in there, that duplexes up to fourplexes and beyond. That's all I know about it. It isn't a question of whether I believe you should have a right to that or not. Simply, that's it.
Okay, so then tomorrow the next question is Hugo's, and he wanted us to read them for him.
I believe that's the same one that we had already answered for him.
Oh, okay, apologies. Then Derek is next.
Yes, Derek would be next. And
Am I on?
Yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, a few things have already been touched on in terms of, say, like a fourplex. It could be rented out. It could be for individual ownership. Are there policies in place to guarantee a certain percentage of those fourplexes would be for home ownership, or is it strictly up to whoever purchased the home ownership? Also, is there a ceiling on the opportunity housing? For example, would it create a bidding war on a particular dwelling of a fourplex if it is for home ownership? And what is to mitigate it from just somebody potentially paying more per square foot, in effect getting more for less, buying that house if there's multiple offers and so forth? Is there a ceiling? And then one final question for the opportunity housing. What is the price point in terms of, well, not the price point, let me flip that. What is the expected household income for a person to afford this affordable housing? And what is the expected down payment? And is it really affordable for middle class individuals or even lower income individuals in the community? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Derek. Yeah, in terms of the affordability of both, rental or ownership, I think, we're currently working on, as was mentioned a little earlier, we're working on preparing a cost feasibility analysis. We're working with a consultant on that to really get an idea, well, what's the price point, whether it be rental or ownership in different areas of the city, and what might that look like, at least in our current market. And so we'll be that report and study will be brought to council when they consider this policy concept to provide additional information and kind of get to, at answering the very questions that you have. In terms of, I think, the rental ownership, it's not something that at least is being proposed to restrict. And there may be some limitations on that too, on what the city can restrict. I know we, like ADUs cannot be sold separate, they have to be rental, or of course they could be used for, someone's family member or so on. But for like a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, at least we're not proposing to restrict whether it be ownership or rental. And there may be some limitations the city has on actually those types of restrictions.
I just want to add, so we're not generally anticipating that missing middle or opportunity housing would be affordable, as in necessarily affordable to lower incomes. I think it's likely to be, I think it's going to be expensive. It just will be more affordable than the 1.2 or $1.3 million home. So there was a developer, for example, that in the Newhall neighborhood, which is kind of in San Jose, but close to the University of Santa Clara, they built duplexes and the units sold for just under $700,000 each. Now, this is a couple of years ago, but that is less than it would be to buy a single family house in the neighborhood. So that just gives you an idea. That being said, so we need to understand that as part of the cost of development study that we're doing. However, we also are tasked, if the council decides to move forward, and Jessica can comment on this if it's wrong, but we're looking at, could there be incentives to incent a developer or a property owner to restrict maybe a unit to at a lower than market rate income level. So that would be part of our work to understand, is there a way to get to actual more deed restricted affordability through this? But we don't have answers to that at this time.
I'll say we're really hopeful that, as this policy will move forward, so that we can work with the city on, some of these policy details that are coming up around how can we design this policy so that it successfully produces home ownership opportunities. Because I think there are ways it could be structured to facilitate that. What type of incentive can we put in place that will help use this to create some amount of affordable housing? As part of the policy, it's not the centerpiece, but it can be a part of it. There are examples that we can point to in Portland and in Austin, where they have policies in place as part of the Portland policy, and sort of separately in Austin to facilitate affordable housing through plexes. It's a way to distribute affordable housing in neighborhoods where it might be more difficult to add otherwise. I think examples we can point to in other cities. In Portland and Minneapolis, we see examples of this scale of housing being affordable to someone earning the median income in that city. Those cities have less severe existing housing crises than San Jose, but that's sort of a proof of concept. We also have census data from around the Bay Area that identifies existing 2, 3, and 4plexes as some of the most affordable housing types in our region based on the income of the people who live there. So we know that existing housing of this type is significantly more affordable and is inhabited by lower income residents than existing single family housing. And so that's another reason that we feel optimistic that this can advance affordability at some level through this policy.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate your responses. You're just eyeballing the numbers. If you're saying an $800,000 home, 20% down would be $160,000. And then what would be the income to generate the mortgage on that? I mean, is that really truly affordable for somebody? That's really the question for opportunity housing. Is it really affordable? Is it really for those people, or is it mainly affordable mainly for investors or contractors to do as they please with it?
I'll say a majority of San Jose households may earn what, over $120,000 a year. So we have I mean, we are blessed in this region with very high wages for many people. There are obviously people who are struggling, and I'm not going to tell you that opportunity housing is a solution for extremely low income individuals or households in San Jose. I just don't think that's they need a different set of housing solutions. But for middle income San Jose residents, I really think this can be part of the solution for, you know, like a household with 2 public school teachers. I think this is something that could be helpful for a household like that. Even at this, I talked, one of my first events I did as a housing advocate in San Jose, I talked to a woman whose daughter was a teacher and she was looking to buy a home. And she could afford a $700,000 home, like the duplex that Michael mentioned. But she couldn't find a $700,000 home to buy. That's the person that opportunity housing can really help and be a transformational change for.
All right, thank you, Aaron, for responding. In the interest of time, let me double check. City staff, there are a few questions left. We could cut off questions at a certain point, including now based on your availability. Would you like to end now or go a few more minutes? Please just let me know.
You can answer more questions. The kid has another half an hour before he goes to bed, so go ahead.
All right, okay, attendees, please, no more questions after this time. And then we'll try to work through some of the existing questions. I'm so sorry, but it is late. There will be another meeting on the 22nd when you could join and ask your additional questions as well. Tomorrow.
Okay. All right. The next question comes from Deborah Torrance. If all of the urban villages were fully built out, how many housing units could that possibly provide?
So the total housing units planned for in the general plan for urban villages is around, you know, approximately 65,000. So if all were, you know, that, then again, that's planned units in our general plan. So if all were developed, that's what we'd be looking at.
All right. So then that's it. Then Jill Borders, using the tall house sample with the 6 condo units, how many are these sold as individual units, which has already been answered? And then is the land owned in common? Is there a homeowners association? And in general, how would opportunity housing ensure more ownership opportunities for individuals and families rather than corporation-owned homes?
I think that was the example from Portland I shared. My understanding is that those are condos. I'm not super familiar with like the nitty gritty details of how condos function, not being someone who's currently looking to buy a condo, but staff might have details.
Yeah, I mean, I think the for sale products could be an HOA, homeowners association. There are cases, I know this is really popular in LA, I believe right now, a tenancy in common. It's also common in San Francisco. I'm not sure I understand all the legal differences between those two things, but there are different mechanisms, legal mechanisms that you can establish an ownership model. But again, so, you know, I think we're agnostic in terms of, we're hopeful that there'll be both rental and for sale, but our policy is not going to have restrictions on one or the other. And we're not sure legally that we can do that. In terms of incentives for building for sale, that's something we have to think about. We haven't gotten there yet, but it's something we can look at.
The next question comes from Ernest Gonzalez. And Ernest, are you there?
Sorry, I was going to say I forgot to promote him to panelist.
Unmute.
We could hear you now.
Okay, well, the other guys answered what I'm looking for, but also, is there a city regulation for all these developments going on for a percentage of them to be handicap accessible to people that want to buy them that might be handicapped?
There are, probably don't have the details in terms of that, but I know, there's definitely, ADA requirements in terms of the building code, and that's a good question. There may be, depending on the number of units in a development, there may be requirements that a certain amount be ADA accessible. Although unfortunately I don't know the details though off the top of my head. So I can't answer for sure.
I can share what Portland did. For 3 and 4plexes, Portland required at least one to have certain accessibility standards. So that was a no-step entry, wide doorways, ground floor, bed and bath. And that was specifically for 3 and 4plexes. So to help facilitate that. And I think Portland's ordinance is a real model in many ways. They have a lot of great details that really are designed to make it successful.
All right, the next question is Doris Lively. And she said, how would it work if people purchase one unit from a fourplex? Who would own the ADU attached to one of the units? Who pays for the yard maintenance, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there were an ADU, I mean, that's a situation where you probably would have an HOA, homeowners association. I mean, we don't have all the detailed answers to that, but that's, I think, typically how that would work.
And then
New York also has another model, which is called co-ops. I'm not familiar with that. It's a very much a New York City thing, but there are other models out there. We're not familiar with the details of those, but we know that they're out there. But yeah, HOA would be a typical thing that's in San Jose, similar situation.
Yeah, if I could say something, the HOA requires such things as maintaining a reserve for future problems, whether it be painting, plumbing, or roofing and whatever. You are required that by law to do that. And you have to carry a fund to make sure that somebody mows the lawn and makes repairs and so on and so forth. So it's a condominium planned unit development sort of thing is requires, it's fairly complicated. So it seems to me that ownership of a fourplex with 4 individual owners, you would need that. You would need some kind of a good legal foundation on who pays what and what happens when one of the units doesn't actually keep up with the dues. So just thank you.
Then the next question comes from Hugo Mesa, and he's asking if the idea of opportunity housing in San Jose is to lead to unit ownership in a fourplex. How would the backyard, front yard, basement, attic, garage, and other parts of a home be subdivided?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty. It's kind of similar to is what David and Michael were mentioning. So those would be kind of typically in an ownership situation. Those are held in common. Those are would be the common ownership, or the pieces of the property that are in a common ownership, and then would be maintained by an HOA that each of those homeowners would pay dues into in order to maintain those common pieces of the property or components.
Okay, then see. Then Brian Prescott is asking a lot of new.
I believe, Tamara, I believe Brian is here.
Oh, okay.
Brian, will you be sharing audio and video?
Yeah, I can share audio. Yeah, so one of my questions was that a lot of the new housing that we're seeing in San Jose comes from, large developers because they're buying, maybe a whole block at a time. And these are big projects that have to go through a very long permitting process that's costly for the developer and costly for the city. So is it possible that this policy would bring smaller developers into the game so that they can get projects around San Jose again? I think that that would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, let me comment on that. That really is one of our drivers of this policy, is you're right. So development in San Jose now is really our big developers. They're called often project sponsors, and they often don't have the money themselves. They're going to Wall Street, pension funds, REITs, to get the capital to build projects. And one developer, I think it was from TMG, said that, putting together a high density housing project was like trying to build a custom made hot rod or sports car. It's very complicated. Everything is unique. You're putting it together. It's expensive. You got to put together the land. You're having an architect design a unique project. And I think the idea of opportunity housing is to build off the success of ADUs and put development in the hands of the little people, the smaller people, property owners, contractors. Not much unlike housing was built prior to Levittown in Long Island, tract housing, before World War II. So that's kind of our goal, is to really open up an area for people to get in the development business that hasn't happened in over, how long ago was World War II? Levittown, 70 years ago. And kind of building off of the tremendous success we've seen with ADUs.
All right, the next question's from Alan Liu. And it says there's lots of houses that have illegally converted plexes in dense neighborhoods to support multi-generational families. Will we study the benefits that homeowners in marginalized neighborhoods will get if they're allowed to legalize their ad hoc expansions, as well as the potential impact or lack thereof that it will have to parking and traffic in these neighborhoods? Because the plexes might already exist illegally. I think the parking was already covered, but would anyone like to add to this or respond to this?
I mentioned that it's a good question. Yeah, thanks for that. And in terms of the policy work that's being proposed, it's more focused on, would be new or either existing existing homes that would be renovated or would be developed into opportunity housing, or new development. But that's a really good question in terms of homes that are already out there that are providing opportunity housing types of residences, in terms of legalizing those. Again, that's not a program such as that is not necessarily part of this proposal. I would mention we do have the city council did approve a ADU amnesty program, so that it is something that it's been explored and is being implemented for ADUs. So that's a really good question and a very interesting idea, and something I think for the council and staff to think about if we were to continue moving forward with allowing opportunity housing in terms of legalizing that type of housing that's already out there today.
The next question is from Hugo Mesa, and he's asking if there are any plans to commit a percentage of opportunity housing redevelopment to affordable housing, Section 8, or any low-income affordability programs.
One of the next steps that would one of the components of action items that we would be looking at in terms of next steps, again, if council directs us to continue working on this, would be looking at potential policies to try to create affordable units, or could there be some type of requirement put in place to provide some deed restricted affordable units as part of opportunity housing. So that's one of the policy questions that would be further studied down the line in the next phase of this work.
Then there's a question from Deborah Torrance, and she says that she heard that Sierra Club offered to speak in opposition for opportunity housing tonight, and the request was denied. And she would,
Deborah, I'm sorry. Deborah, did you want to share your audio and video to pose a question?
oh,
Audio. How's that? Yeah, so that was my question. I had read in an email from somebody that the Sierra Club had been in, or had requested to attend one of these meetings and present. Is there any truth in that? And if so, could you talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely. So I think that's a question for the co-host, so we'll go ahead and respond. I wanted to make sure you were able to share your audio and video if you wanted to. Sorry that we started answering or posing your question. And so the original groups invited to present on the 15th and the 22nd were the various Citizens Advisory Council and also the Willow Glen Neighborhood Association, and both declined. That was a process that ultimately ended with their declining the invitation. At that point, an invitation was issued to hundreds of people to see who was interested in presenting in opposition. David Eisbach, who is presenting tonight, graciously accepted the offer and indicated interest in presenting in both dates. And so anyone who inquired about it after David was confirmed was unfortunately declined. That included a couple of people, one gentleman who said he's, I think, the co-chair of a committee for the Sierra Club. I forget the exact details, but yes, at least a couple of people who responded after David were unfortunately a little too late. So, but thank you for,
Okay.
for
Yeah.
the clarification.
Thank you. And thank you all for your participation tonight. I have to log out now, but thank you so much. This was super informative.
All right. Yeah, have a good night. And then we'll go on with the questions.
Okay.
all right. The next question comes from Ryan, and he says, will staff study how many homes they expect to be subdivided within the existing structure versus torn down and rebuilt into a duplex, triplex, or fourplex? And they said that they know an older couple that got divorced and converted their one home into a duplex so they could age in place, and they were happy with the arrangement.
Yes, we actually will be studying that as part of our cost effectiveness study. We're going to be looking at factors in which, I guess, identify how many properties would, likely convert, but also the cost it would be to subdivide an existing home versus to tear down and rebuild. Those are all things that we're going to evaluate as part of the cost effectiveness study.
All right. Thank you, everyone, panelists, for joining us, for taking the time to speak, for staying 21 minutes extra. And thank you to all the attendees for making time. And then thank you to the person presenting in opposition and the person presenting in support. I think that given the number of questions from community members, I think this meeting is fulfilling the intended purpose, which is to allow community members to become informed. And so I want to wish everyone a good night.
Oh, just thank you very much for being here tonight and answering questions for everyone. And thank you, everyone, for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Good night.
Thank you.
Had a lot of fun.
Night.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.